Scott Jennings, great to have you. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Yeah, A Revolution of Common Sense. I mean, that pretty much says it all. It's such a great title. Talk to me about the essence of that common sense and why you wanted to write this book.
Well, I heard the president use that phrase in his inaugural address, and I thought this really does sum up the political branding that he's applied to the Republican Party and to the conservative movement. And it's how he describes what he does. I traveled with him a little bit and spent some time with him during the writing of the book. And on his 100th day in office, he took me to Michigan. And at his rally, he said, I'll paraphrase, whether you're right or whether you're left, whatever you are, it's just common sense. And so he has applied that phrasing, I think, to his political movement. So I thought it made for a good title because it really does kind of sum up the way he approaches his decision making.
And it seems like you would be a perfect guy to write this book, right? I mean, Dawson Springs, Kentucky, and just, your roots kind of come from that common sense coal mining town environment. Talk to me a little bit about that aspect of it, because it does seem to be a fusion aspect to this.
Yeah, I do come from rural West Kentucky. I'm the son of a garbage man and a factory worker, and I've sort of lived through, I've been in politics for 25 years, but I've kind of lived through the evolution of both the Republican Party and Middle America as, predominantly blue-collar Democrats to really strong Trump supporters. My dad was a big Clinton guy, Union guy. My grandfather was a New Deal Democrat, really. But my dad was also the first person to tell me Donald Trump was going to be the next president. And he, like a lot of people who were situated like him in rural West Kentucky, in those coal mining towns, had a feeling that the Democratic Party had left them behind, both economically and culturally. And this has been happening over a period of years, but it really exploded when Donald Trump came along. So I've sort of used my roots in that sense, plus my experience in politics for the last 25 years to sort of synthesize my own views about Donald Trump. And to try to help explain it every night on CNN in my day job and also in this book, A Revolution of Common Sense.
There's been a process for you personally to kind of, in terms of on the Trump bandwagon, if you will, but because it's also been a process for the Republican Party. I mean, it's really kind of mirrored itself, if you will.
That is exactly right. Now, I voted for him 3 times, but I wrote once a piece for the Los Angeles Times and said I had been on the roller coaster with Donald Trump, and at a few moments I was a little green around the gills on some of the loop-de-loops. But what I have come to realize, and the subtitle of the book, How Donald Trump Stormed Washington and Fought for Western Civilization, what I have come to realize is that the United States is the last best hope for the West. Europe has been overrun, and our president is standing on the front lines defending what we know as Western civilization. And so I guess I sort of sobered up in some ways about the larger battles that we're fighting. It's not just over day-to-day policy stuff. There are larger forces going on in the world. He is our leader. The United States is the best hope in the world for the future of the West. And I think he's delivering. He's got a lot of domestic opponents of what he's trying to do, but in a large sense, it's a fight for the future of the West, and the president is our leader.
And you don't really find decorum on the front lines many times, which is what, he's basically saying. In essence, he's kind of like a middle finger to the entire country to say, hey, look, all right, so let me ask you a little bit about the significance of the Trump presidency and some of your findings in the book. Like, what are you trying to show here about the second term specifically? And of course, the first term kind of weaves into this as well.
Well, what I wanted to understand was how he operates. How does he make decisions? I told him when I pitched him on the book in early February, I went to the Oval Office and I said, look, I think you revolutionized presidential campaigning. You totally changed the way we do it. He changed a lot of the tactical models in the Republican Party, and he was successful with it. I said, in the same way that you did that, I think you are about to revolutionize governing, especially in the first 100 days. I don't think we've seen a president this active as an executive since maybe FDR. And he has a picture of FDR hanging up in the Oval Office, which is interesting for a Republican president. And so I wanted to understand, how did he do that? How did he hit the ground running? What kind of team did he need to pull that off? What were some of the issues that were emblematic of this hitting the ground running and really smacking Washington in the face when he got back into office? I just kind of wanted to understand decision-making process, management style, how did they pick out the issue set? And I was sort of writing it as it was going along in the first few months of the administration, and so it's kind of an amalgam of all those things. And I'll tell you one thing I've learned. I don't know who the heck was running the country in the 4 years previous, but I sure as heck know who's running it right now. The nerve center of our government is the Oval Office, and it's right behind the Resolute desk. It is not diffused. He's got his cabinet in there. There are people coming and going. It's a bustling West Wing. The president, the elected president, is firmly in control of the country.
Yeah. So what was the sweeping conclusion of what some of your answers to your questions were? I mean, you obviously, the granular, you'll have people read the book and find out, but was there a sweeping conclusion as to, you know, what makes him tick and how this is going about in the second term?
Well, my conclusion is that the first time around, I'm not altogether certain they expected to win. And I think when they did win, it was such a surprise that he wound up with a team, good people, but they didn't match his management style. This time, expected to win, felt they were going to win, had a plan, knew who they wanted to bring into the government so that on day one, they could begin to execute. And so my sweeping conclusion is that it's a very hands-on president. He didn't want any time to waste. He wasn't, you know, look, he won. He had the greatest comeback in politics since, you know, Napoleon. I mean, the guy could have rested on his laurels. I won, I can't, you know, I did it. But instead of doing that, he shows up on day one, signs almost 200 executive orders. They begin to execute on the agenda. And the first 10 months of this administration have been nothing short of miraculous if you're a Trump voter in terms of everything they've been able to accomplish on the agenda, on the promises. He has gone much, you know, I talked to a lot of Trump supporters as I was writing this book and talked to them every day. I think people are shocked at how much he's been able to get done and how far he's been able to go.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Let me read you a quote from the book. You're very pro-Israel, obviously. Tens of millions of evangelicals pro-Israel as well. This is what you say about Trump regarding Israel. You say, in some sense, curiosity combined with a healthy dose of audacity is one of the qualities that has enabled the man to score some of his biggest wins. This is especially true when it comes to foreign policy, and Israel is a good example.
I wrote that before and turned this book in before the hostages came home and before we sit here at the brink of possible historic peace in the Middle East, but it turned out to be prescient. On the Israel issue, the president has shown extreme moral clarity. He always believed Iran could not be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. He always could tell the difference between the good guys and the bad guys. And let's be honest, in this world and in this fight between Israel and these terrorists, a lot of people got confused about that, but the president never did. And I think one of the parts of his leadership here that gets missed is that he's not willing to be hemmed in by, well, we've never done it that way before, or, well, you know, this is typically how this goes. That's the last thing you want to tell this president. He will not be hemmed in by, we've always done it this way. He thinks outside the box. He has unique relationships with Bibi and the other leaders in the Arab countries. I actually believe he was the only president, the only American president who could have pulled off the hostage deal because of his ability to get all these personalities into the room. He is a friend of Israel. He understands the relationship, and he's not an isolationist. He will engage when it makes sense and at the right time. And I think the strike on the Iranian nuclear sites was a righteous decision, but it was made at the exact right time, and you can draw a straight line from that to getting the hostages back and to sitting here on the brink of a peace deal and on the brink of the expansion of the Abraham Accords.
What do you think, how do you think history is going to see President Trump? I understand there are a lot of liberal historians out there and they're going to have their take, but what about you? I mean, where is President Trump going to potentially rank kind of at the end of the day?
That is a fascinating question. You know, when I pitched him on the book, I said, I think 100 people are going to come along and write books attacking you and saying terrible things about you, but at least one person who kind of gets you should be allowed to write a book. And he said, call me next week. But that was a question that was on my mind. How will all this be judged? And it's hard to judge things in the moment. You don't know how things are going to turn out. But I will tell you, I think that what I said to him initially is true. He will be remembered as someone who revolutionized political campaigning. I think he'll be someone who revolutionized governing. And we went from a very passive president who may not have known what was going on in his own White House, probably didn't on some days, to a president who is involved in very granular details of governing. I think he'll be remembered as someone who oversaw the expansion of power inside the executive branch. You know, all presidents get a little more power. That's been the nature of the modern presidency. But this president has done as much as he can to have as much power in the executive branch. He's taken on the courts. I also think he's going to be remembered quite well by history on foreign affairs. I mean, you look already, 8 peace deals, the hostages coming home from Israel, the brink of peace in the Middle East. He hasn't solved Ukraine-Russia yet, but everything else he's gotten involved in, he's pretty much solved when it comes to foreign affairs. You know, we used to use the phrase war and peace a lot. When I think of President Trump, I think he's peace and war. He thinks of peace before he thinks of war. He's not unwilling to engage and show the strength of the United States, but he earnestly seeks peace. He does not like war. And I think over time, historians will judge that to have been a good trait for the American president, someone who desires peace but was strong enough to make it happen.
Anything surprise you in this book, or was it kind of a process for you to kind of go through because you've kind of come a long way, if you will? I mean, what was some of that like for you on a personal level?
Well, I didn't know him that well. You know, I first met him really and spoke to him in February and spent a little time with him while writing the book. I met a lot of people I didn't know. I only knew Elon Musk through some interactions we had on X. I interviewed Elon Musk on the 101st day in office, and I could tell at the moment that I interviewed him he was bent out of shape. I asked him, you know, you have this zeal for public service now all of a sudden. Why is the world's richest man sleeping on a cot in the executive office building? And he said, I'm trying to find a way to make America not go bankrupt. And he believed that we have run ourselves into a ditch fiscally, that we're devaluing our currency, and that the mass migration crisis, you put all that together, and it's going to lead to the downfall of the United States. He firmly believed that. And I asked him, I said, well, has anyone in Washington impressed you, or you know, who have you been happy with up on Capitol Hill that shares your fervor? And he could only think of one person, and that was Rand Paul. You could tell, you know, from my home state of Kentucky, but you could tell he was kind of bent out of shape, that people didn't share his alarm at the fiscal health of the country long term and at what this immigration crisis has really done to our culture. Of course, he also famously is worried about birth rates. But for Elon, too, this idea that Western civilization is at stake was on his mind. And I knew he was bent out of shape the day I interviewed him. And look, I'm an Elon fan. But I didn't realize what was going to happen a few days later, where he had his sort of dramatic, maybe momentary, but dramatic break from President Trump.
Interesting. Look, political consulting, right? You know it well. It's fascinating to me that President Trump is basically a billionaire who talks like a cab driver. And if Mitt Romney had that skill, he'd probably be president of the United States.
Yeah.
It's just fascinating. I'm just curious to kind of, from a political consulting cap that you put on in this, just to see that kind of morph and be able to connect with the American people is pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I agree with you about Mitt Romney, who I think was a very moral person and a good person. I was on his campaign in 2012. I watched him on the campaign trail, and he did have a hard time connecting with the common, average, everyday working person. I think they liked him, and I think they thought he was a good person, but there's an emotional connection. There's a gear that people who get elected president have. Trump has it. And he gives millions of Americans the feeling that he speaks for them in a way that they would speak if anybody ever put a microphone in front of their face. That's the feeling that he gives them. That's the feeling he gives my dad, who I was talking about earlier, who kind of detected early on that something was happening inside the Republican Party. And so I think Trump, you know, people have asked me, he's not a traditional Republican, what is he? You know, he's not a traditional evangelical Christian, but they love him. Why is that? And I always say, we didn't hire this man to sing soprano in the choir. We hired him to guard the church door. And by the way, the barbarians are at the gates. And Republicans and evangelicals inherently know that, and they believe Donald Trump is strong enough to lead the fight against it.
Very nice. On the media, we'll talk about the media, because obviously, yeah, you know something about the media. You're there every night on CNN doing your due diligence. This is what you said. You say, sometimes people ask me if I thought these panels were fair. And I stopped to think about it once and said, no, not really, but if they added 2 or 3 more liberals, it might be.
Yeah.
That is a great line. What is it like on that set every night? It's not even about so much defending President Trump as it is just kind of enlightening the panel.
Yes. Well, first of all, it's a privilege to do it. And I think CNN deserves a lot of credit for putting a debating show on the air. I think it's the only show like it. It gives conservatives a chance to air out our arguments. And when you're doing it, against folks, what I have realized is some of my fellow panelists and people they bring on, I might be the only Republican they know. And if not but for being contractually obligated to do so, they might not know any. And so just creating live contact between the two points of view in America, liberals and conservatives, makes for fascinating television. But my job is to translate from Red America how we are absorbing the news, why we see things the way we do, using my political experience and my authentic values to say, well, this is how this decision strikes me. I recognize you all are mad about it, but here's how somebody from Dawson Springs, Kentucky is going to absorb it. And I think for our audience, it's a valuable perspective. I think it makes them smarter. And I think ultimately that's what you're shooting for on cable news. Am I making the audience smarter? And I think 6 people sitting around, just nodding in agreement with each other doesn't really make the audience smarter. But a test of ideas, and where one guy can tell you how half or 80% or sometimes 90% of the country, how they're thinking about something, you'll be smarter by listening to it. And I think that about this book. If you love Trump, you'll be smarter about understanding why he operates the way he does. And if you don't like him, you'll also be smarter for understanding how the opening days of this administration unfolded.
And part of the strategy clearly is a media strategy. He plays the media like a fiddle.
Yes. And I have a chapter in the book about his interactions with the media early on. And I think in the first term, obviously he was going to face a re-election campaign. And they did what a lot of politicians do. They were sort of calibrating against the media. How is this going to play? He was always tough on the media. This time around, the media landscape's totally different. You have independent media sources, independent journalists. The mainstream media, the corporate media, they're just not as important to him or as influential as they once were, and they know it. And so there's less fear, I think, in how is this going to be portrayed by the media when it comes to their decision making. There's a lot of liberation in that. And there's also a lot of pluck in it. I think his communications team, Stephen Chung, the comms director, Caroline Levitt, the press secretary, and the rest of the team, I think they have run circles around the Democratic communicators and the media that they joust with every day. It's one of the reasons I think that Trump has been so successful. His comms people get modern communications. They've revolutionized it inside the White House. They've made room for new media outlets in the briefing room. They participate in a lot of non-traditional communications settings. Trump still does his fair share of the old world media, but the way that staff and the way that comm shop is organized, the media and the Democrats have yet to catch up with them, and I'm not sure they ever will.
Right. Let me ask you, did it ever surprise you when you said to yourself, wow, I'm writing a book like this about Trump, the Mitch McConnell days, the George W. Bush days, and here you are writing this book, and it makes me think a little bit about Dick Cheney passing away this past week, because really 2 obits could be written about Dick Cheney, right? One up until 2009 and then after 2009. And the fact that he's the guy that conservatives, I mean, let's be honest, the baby boomers that are, I say baby boomers, baby boomers and Gen X who are MAGA today, they loved Dick Cheney back in the day.
They did. Yeah.
They did. And so that's Dick Cheney for obit number 1. But obit number 2 is the fact that he would vote for Kamala Harris in 2024. So I'm curious to kind of put all that together for me.
Sure. Well, I worked in both Bush-Cheney campaigns. I served in the Bush-Cheney White House and got to brief the vice president on a number of occasions. And, I, like you, I think revered him. I mean, he was the youngest White House chief of staff, a powerhouse in congressional leadership. I mean, this man loved to amass power for the Republican Party and wield power for the Republican Party. He also loved executive branch authority. He loved to amass and wield power inside the White House, just the same way the Trump operation does. They love to amass and wield power. So there are some similarities there about their desire to fight and to win. Obviously, he broke with President Trump after January 6th, and he did not come back. And his daughter, Liz Cheney, became the most prominent Trump critic in the country. I always attributed his endorsement of Harris in 2024 a little bit to support for his own daughter. And, but I don't think it takes away from Dick Cheney's contributions to the conservative movement, to the Republican cause. I still remember in 2004 being on the campaign and watching him defenestrate John Edwards in that vice presidential debate. And, you could just feel the air coming out of that campaign as Dick Cheney took Edwards to the woodshed. And so, I think those kinds of people are fascinating. They were valuable in their moment. The through line from Bush to Cheney to McConnell to Romney to Trump, though, for me as a Republican, I happily voted for them all and I happily worked for them all. The through line is that in their moment, They were the best defender of Western civilization. They were the best defenders of free speech. And they were the best people in the arena to keep America safe. I thought that about Bush. I think that about Donald Trump. And I know they don't get along, and I'm kind of a nexus and a bridge between all these people. But I think it's true about all of them. And I think we have to be clear-eyed about who's the real opposition here. It's not each other. The real opposition are the people on the radical left, the people who hate Western civilization, the people who think America is rotten at its core. That's who Bush was fighting. It's also who Trump is fighting. And now I think that opposition is more radical than ever.
Yeah, and those key words, in their moment, I think is the key. In terms of your book and moving forward for the Republican Party and for life after Trump, how do you kind of square some of what you're writing about Trump now as to what might happen in the future for the Republican Party? Because they're at I say a crossroads. They're always at a crossroads, but this is a big deal.
It's a great question. After I'd finished the book, I had him on my radio show, the president, and I said, who do you think could carry on your movement? Is there one person? And he answered it for 3 or 4 minutes, but he never said any name. I think he knows he's singular. I think he knows what he's done is created something unique. It's the greatest comeback story in modern American political history. It's one of the most unique presidencies and set of presidential campaigns we've ever seen. And people are drawn to him in a way that's it's hard to ever think about someone replicating. The question is, even if you can't replicate him personally, can you at least approach replicating the issues and the motivations of the people who turned out to vote for him? This is a challenge for the Republican Party. A lot of people like to vote Trump. Then they don't show up for the other Republicans. Can they ever be converted to vote for Republican candidates for Senate, for, say, J.D. Vance in 2028? This is what we don't know the answer to yet. It's one of the great lingering questions coming out of my book, but also just, coming out of my experience as a political operative. We don't yet know what the Republican coalition is after Trump. I think we know most of it, but that group of people who he motivates to turn out just for him, could they ever be corralled into becoming regular voting Republicans? We don't know yet, but to me, it's the #1 strategic issue facing the Republican Party.
As we wrap up real quick, let me ask you a little bit about the off-year elections, and we'll tie it into the book. But look, I'm curious to get your take real quick, but on these off-year elections, to me at least, you saw Spanberger and Mikey Sherrill both being at least positioned as center-left Democrats. And because of that, you had folks, they overperformed. And you wonder if the Democrats will get a lesson to say, center left over far left is the better alternative. I'm not suggesting they can do it, and maybe that's not where the energy of the party is now. As a matter of fact, we probably know it's not. But I am curious to get your take on those off-year elections, because I do think it plays into my last question, which is a very long run-on question, but it has to do with tribalism, because you've done seminars on tribalism, tribalism in American politics. And where are we in America where the Democrat Party is, where what Trump has done with the Republican Party, and how that fits into kind of the fabric of America?
I've been thinking about tribalism in the wake of the Virginia elections. They elected a Democrat attorney general who sent text messages saying he wanted to murder Republican opponents and to watch their children die. And most Democrats just said, okay, I'm fine with that. That's one of the most tribalistic things that's happened in modern elections. I will quibble with your characterization of Sherrill and Spanberger a little. They voted down the party line as members of Congress.
They positioned themselves as moderates.
They were positioned that way, but Spanberger still thinks it's okay for boys to walk into your daughter's locker room at school. And so, to me, that's still a glaring problem for the left, is even when you're positioning yourself as a moderate, you have taken lots of positions that are nowhere near what you or I would define as moderate. But this is the great competition for them heading into 2028. Do you go down that road of people that you could plausibly position as moderate? Or do you go down the road of Mamdani, who says in his speech on election night, I'm a proud democratic socialist. I will never apologize for that. He's quoting Eugene Debs, the most prominent Marxist presidential candidate of his day. These are the competing poles. It feels to me like the energy in the Democratic Party is with Mamdani. You look at how young people voted. Yeah, they voted for Sherrill and Spanberger, plus 40 for Mamdani. They love that socialist energy. I don't think it's going to fly throughout the country. That's my personal view, but it's going to fly in Democratic primaries, and I think this could lead them down a road of nominating some unelectable people, but we got a few months yet to find that out.
My really last question about this book, what do you want people to ultimately understand about the Trump presidency and maybe about President Trump himself?
A couple things. Number one, and I think this happened to President Bush too when I worked for him, the caricature of the president that you see in the media is not exactly accurate. In person, he's funny, he's warm, he listens. I've watched him listen to debates among advisors, he's engaged, he asks questions. So this idea, that he wouldn't be listening or that he just is that's not true. He's very hospitality minded. He gave me the hat off his head one day and signed it for my dad without thinking twice about it. Number three, he's funny. He's sort of like Rodney Dangerfield and Don Rickles and Dave Chappelle had a baby and here's Donald Trump. I mean, he's a funny guy. Number four, he loves America. And number five, I do believe he understands that on his shoulders rests the fight for the future of Western civilization. So it was eye-opening for me. As a political actor, I feel closer to President Trump now than I ever have. Even though there are things about him or decisions he's made that I don't necessarily agree with, but just what he's doing, the way he operates, I feel closer to him today than I ever have. I think that's true for millions of Republicans who he may not have been their cup of tea in 2016. Maybe they got queasy after January the 6th, but today, what he represents in our culture and in our world, they feel quite close to him, and I think you'll feel that after you read the book.
Scott Jennings, a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.